The day my siblings finally called my parents mom and dad again, I knew they wanted something. Because for 11 years, they had been strangers. Not visitors, not helpers, not even occasional phone calls. Strangers. And the only reason they came back was because they heard my parents were old, wealthy, and close to the end. But what they did not know was this. I had already seen this coming. And by the time they walked into my parents' house pretending to be loving children, I had already built the trap that would destroy every lie they told. My name is Elena, and this is the story of how my siblings tried to steal from our aging parents and ended up losing everything. I was 29 when my life became a full-time job of caring for two people who had once cared for four children. My parents were not poor. They had spent their whole lives building a beautiful life. A big house, a quiet property, savings, investments, a stable future. But money does not stop time. My father's knees became weak. My mother's hands started trembling. One doctor visit turned into 10. 10 turned into a routine. Then came the pills, the appointments, the memory slips, the fear in their eyes when they forgot simple things like the date or which medicine they had already taken. That was when my siblings disappeared completely. My brother Daniel said he was too busy with work. My sister Monica said her children needed her more. My youngest brother Aaron said he couldn't handle the emotional stress. That was their favorite excuse. Stress. As if I was not stressed too. As if I did not also have bills, a job, a life, and a heart that broke a little more every time I watched my parents struggle to climb the stairs. But I stayed. I cooked. I cleaned. I drove them to appointments. I sat beside my mother at night when she could not sleep because she was afraid of dying. I helped my father bathe when his arthritis was too painful. I learned every medication, every doctor's instruction, every insurance form, every legal paper, every bank update. And through all of it, my siblings were nowhere. Not once did they ask, "How are mom and dad doing?" Not once did they offer to take a shift. Not once did they send money. Not once did they show up on a normal Tuesday just to sit with them. But then something changed. It was subtle at first. A few extra calls. A few more texts. Then suddenly, everyone remembered my parents existed. My brother Daniel started calling my father Sir, like he was trying on respect the way people try on a suit before a wedding. Monica brought flowers. Aaron brought store-bought soup and kept saying, "Mom, I miss you so much." They all smiled too hard. They all touched my mother's shoulder a little too often. They all asked too many questions about finances, too many questions about property, too many questions about what plans my parents had made. And that was when I felt it. That cold, ugly feeling in my stomach. They had heard about the money. Maybe from a relative. Maybe from a neighbor. Maybe from a lawyer's office. Maybe they had simply remembered that old people often leave behind something valuable. Whatever the reason, they were back. Not for love. For inheritance. I watched them play their little game for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of fake kindness. 2 weeks of dramatic concern. 2 weeks of compliments they never earned. They asked my mother how she slept, while secretly checking whether she still had the mental strength to sign documents. They asked my father if he trusted me with so much responsibility, while trying to plant doubt in his mind. They offered to help organize things. And every time they said that, they looked at each other like they were already dividing the future. I said nothing, at least not out loud, because I had already learned something important about people like them. When greedy people think they are winning, they reveal everything. And I needed them to reveal everything. So while they were performing for my parents, I was preparing. I contacted an estate attorney. I updated every file. I gathered medical records. I created a timeline of my parents' care. And most importantly, I set up what my parents later called our secret protection trust. It was not truly secret, of course. It was legal, clear, documented, smart. My parents had still been mentally capable when we did it, and the attorney made sure everything was done properly. The trust protected their property and assets from being bullied, pressured, or manipulated. If my siblings were thinking about forcing a new will or gaining power of attorney to redirect everything toward themselves, they were already too late. But I did one more thing. I started recording, not secretly in some dramatic movie way with hidden cameras everywhere. Nothing illegal, just conversations, voicemails, video meetings, anything that showed their behavior, their comments, their manipulation, their sudden interest in money, their attempts to isolate my parents from me. Their carefully chosen words like, maybe Elena is overwhelmed, and maybe it would be better if one of us handled things. My father did not know everything at first. My mother knew some of it, but I told them the truth slowly and gently. I said, they did not come because they missed you. They came because they smelled what you might leave behind. My mother cried. My father just sat in silence for a long time. Then he said the words I will never forget. Then let them come. We will see who they really are. The confrontation happened on a Thursday. I remember because I had spent the whole morning helping my mother get ready for a lunch my siblings had arranged. They said it was for family. That word made me almost laugh. Family. As if family meant showing up after years of neglect with fake smiles and expensive perfume. The lunch was at our parents' house. The dining table was set beautifully. My mother had made soup. My father had dressed in his best shirt. And my siblings arrived like actors walking onto a stage. Daniel came first. Carrying a bottle of wine he knew my father could not drink with his medication. Monica followed with a dessert. She did not bake herself, but praised as if it came from her own hands. Aaron arrived last, wearing that soft, caring expression people use when they want to be believed. They hugged my parents for too long. They told them they looked so good. They said they had been worried. They said they regretted being so busy. They said life had just happened. Then the questions started. Soft at first. How were the bills being handled? Who had access to the bank accounts? Had my parents made proper arrangements for the future? Did they have a lawyer? Had they updated their documents? I watched my mother's face tighten. I watched my father's jaw set. And I watched my siblings lean in like wolves pretending to be lambs. Then Daniel said it. He said, we just want to make sure everything is safe. Maybe it would be easier if one of us had power of attorney. That way no one has to worry. No one has to worry. That was his line. As if he had spent 11 years carrying the worry. As if I had not been the one buying medicine and missing work and losing sleep, and holding my father's arm when he nearly fell in the bathroom. My mother looked at me. I gave her a small nod. And then my father spoke. He said, why now? Daniel blinked. What do you mean? My father leaned back slowly in his chair. Why are you here now? After years of silence. The room went still. Monica smiled too quickly and said, Dad, that is unfair. We have all been busy. Busy, my father repeated. Busy enough to forget your mother's birthday? Busy enough to miss every surgery? Busy enough to let your sister do everything alone? No one answered. Because no one had a good lie for that. Then Aaron tried a softer approach. Dad, we just care. Elena has been under so much pressure. Maybe she is making decisions without telling everyone. There it was. The seed. The accusation. The attempt to paint me as controlling so they could look concerned. I smiled for the first time that day. Not warmly, just enough. And I said, it is funny you mention pressure. I have records of every doctor appointment, every pharmacy pickup, every bill, every call to every specialist, every time Mom cried at 2 a.m., and every time Dad asked me to help because nobody else came. Monica crossed her arms. Daniel narrowed his eyes. Aaron looked annoyed, like I had interrupted a script he had carefully rehearsed. Then my father reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. He placed it on the table. "I think," he said, "we should call the lawyer." That was when their faces changed. Not worry, not confusion, fear, because they knew something was wrong. The lawyer arrived 40 minutes later. His name was Mr. Bennett, and he had handled my parents' estate for years. He greeted everyone politely, but his eyes were sharp. He asked my siblings to repeat what they had been discussing. They tried to phrase everything beautifully. Just helping, just planning, just making sure there were no misunderstandings. But lawyers hear what people are not saying, and Mr. Bennett had already reviewed the trust documents I had asked him to prepare in advance. He looked at my parents. "Do you understand the changes you made?" My father said, "Yes." "Were you pressured?" My mother said, "No." "Did anyone force you to reconsider your estate plan?" My father looked straight at Daniel. "No, but some people sure tried." That was when I pressed play on my phone. I had audio recordings. One from Daniel saying, "If we can get Dad to sign while he is still confused, it will be easier." One from Monica saying, "Elena thinks she owns the house because she stayed. We can fix that." One from Aaron saying, "Once we get power of attorney, she will have no choice." The room exploded. Daniel stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. "That is illegal," he shouted. "You recorded us?" I looked at him calmly. "You plotted against our parents in their own house." Monica's face went red. "You are disgusting." "No," I said. "What is disgusting is pretending to love people only when you think there is money to be taken." Aaron tried to recover. "These are taken out of context." Mr. Bennett opened the trust file. "There is no out-of-context interpretation for attempted coercion," he said. Then came the moment they never expected. At my request, Mr. Bennett had already invited a police officer to be present, not because we wanted drama, because we wanted proof, because elderly financial abuse is real, and this was exactly what it looked like. The officer introduced himself and asked everyone to remain seated. Daniel laughed at first, because greedy people often think confidence can save them. Then the officer asked them one question. "Did you ask your parents to sign legal documents when you knew they were vulnerable and dependent on the daughter who has been caring for them?" No one spoke. The silence was louder than a confession. The officer turned to the lawyer. Mr. Bennett handed over copies of the recordings, text messages, and notes I had prepared. My siblings' faces went pale. For the first time in their lives, they looked small, not powerful, not persuasive, just exposed. And when my father said, with a voice that was quiet but final, "I do not trust you anymore," that was the real end. No shouting could fix it. No excuse could repair it. No tears could rewrite the truth. They were not arrested that day, not in the dramatic way people imagine, but they were officially documented. The police report was filed. The attorney created a legal record of attempted coercion and manipulation. My parents immediately revoked any informal access they had given to my siblings. Their names were removed from every discussion regarding care, money, or authority. The trust remained in place. The will stayed protected. And the siblings who had marched in like they owned the future were escorted out with nothing but their own shame. Monica cried in the driveway. Daniel kept saying, "This is a misunderstanding." Aaron kept blaming me. Of course he did. People like that always blame the one person who told the truth. But the truth does not disappear just because it makes them uncomfortable. After they left, the house went quiet. My mother sat down and covered her face with both hands. My father stared out the window for a long time. I thought he was angry, but when he finally turned to me, his eyes were wet. He said, "I should have seen it sooner." I shook my head. "No," I said. "You were hoping they were better than they were." That is the painful part of family betrayal. It does not just break your trust. It breaks your hope. My mother reached for my hand. "You saved us," she whispered. I almost told her that was not true, that I was only doing what love asks us to do. But the truth is, I was tired. I had been tired for years. Tired of being the only one who cared. Tired of hearing excuses. Tired of swallowing my pain. And yet standing there in that house, with the truth finally on the table, I realized something I had not understood before. Being the only responsible child is not weakness. It is a kind of strength people often notice too late. A week later, my siblings tried to call. Then they tried emails. Then they tried sending messages through cousins and family friends. They said they wanted to talk. They said they wanted to work things out. They said I was destroying the family. But the family had been broken long before I ever pulled out a recording. I did not answer. My parents did not answer. Because once people show you exactly who they are when money enters the room, you do not need a second performance. The house changed after that. Not instantly, but slowly. It became quieter in a better way. Safesh. My father started sleeping more peacefully. My mother stopped looking over her shoulder every time the phone rang. And me? For the first time in years, I was no longer fighting alone to keep my parents safe. I was their daughter again, not just their caretaker, not just the one who held everything together. Their daughter, and that mattered. People always ask me later if I felt guilty for exposing my siblings, for recording them, for bringing the police and the lawyer into it. The answer is no, not even a little. Because guilt belongs to the people who tried to use vulnerable parents like a payday. Guilt belongs to the ones who vanished when there was no money to steal. Guilt belongs to the ones who smiled while planning betrayal. I only did what needed to be done. I protected my parents from predators wearing family names. And in the end, that is what love sometimes looks like. Not soft, not pretty. Not easy, but strong, quiet, unshakable. My father sat with that legal folder in his lap for nearly an hour after everyone left. No one spoke. The house felt different after betrayal has been named out loud. Not empty, not peaceful, just honest. Finally, my mother asked the question that had been sitting in all of our hearts. Do you think they ever loved us? My father's eyes stayed on the papers. I think, he said slowly, they loved what we could give them. That answer hurt, but it was the truth. And truth is painful when it removes the last piece of hope you were still trying to protect. I sat beside my mother and held her hand. She looked older that day than she had the day before. Not because of time, because betrayal ages people in a way medicine cannot measure. She whispered, I kept thinking they would come back for us. I said, they did come back. She looked at me. I finished the sentence. They just did not come back for us. That was the moment she cried the hardest. Not because she was weak, because she finally understood what she had been trying not to understand for years. That same evening, Mr. Bennett stayed late to review everything again. He went through the trust one more time. He explained the protections line by line. He showed us how the assets would be managed, how no one could suddenly force a change, and how every suspicious interaction would now be documented. He told my parents something I will never forget. Many families lose everything because they wait until the damage is done. You did the right thing by acting early. My father nodded slowly. Then he looked at me. Not with anger, not with sadness, with something much heavier. Regret. I should have listened when you first warned me, he said. I shook my head. You did listen. You just wanted to believe better things about them. That is what parents do. They keep a door open long after everyone else would have locked it. Sometimes that mercy is beautiful. Sometimes it becomes dangerous. Over the next few days, the truth spread through the family. Not because we announced it, Because the people who came pretending to be innocent could not keep their stories straight. Daniel told one cousin that I had tricked my parents. Monica told another that I had taken over the estate. Aaron told someone else that the lawyer had misunderstood everything. But lies do not travel well when they are built on greed. Eventually, people started asking questions. Why had they been absent for so long? Why did they suddenly return when the house and money were being discussed? Why were they trying to get power of attorney instead of simply caring for their parents? Those questions did more damage to them than any argument I could have made. Because when people begin asking the right questions, manipulation starts to fall apart. One aunt called me quietly and said, "I knew something felt off." A former neighbor said, "They only started showing up when they thought the inheritance was close." Even one of Daniel's friends admitted he had bragged about getting ahead of the family situation. That was the word he used. Situation. Not parents. Not care. Not love. Situation. Like my parents were a problem to be solved before the money could be collected. The saddest part was not the confrontation. It was the after. Because once the siblings were gone, my parents had to grieve something deeper than money. They had to grieve the children they thought they raised. The children they believed would one day protect each other. The children they imagined would gather at their table with kindness instead of greed. That dream died in pieces. And I watched it happen in real time. My mother started keeping old photo albums near her chair. She would stare at pictures of all 4 children when they were young and say, "They used to be so sweet." My father would answer, "Maybe they still are somewhere." But there was always a pause after that, because neither of them truly believed it anymore. And that is one of the cruelest things a person can do to their parents. Not just steal from them, make them mourn the memory of you. A month later, there was another attempt. This time, it was through an attorney representing Daniel. He claimed Daniel wanted to clear up misunderstandings and requested access to the estate documents. Mr. Bennett refused. Then Monica sent a letter saying she felt emotionally excluded from family matters. Aaron tried to approach my father at a pharmacy parking lot and pretended it was accidental. He said, "I just want to come home." My father answered him with one sentence. "You were home when you had love to give. Now you only want a roof over your greed." Aaron had nothing to say to that. Neither did I. Because some people only know how to speak when they think they are winning. When they lose, they stand there with empty hands and borrow tears. I remember one quiet evening when my father asked me to sit with him on the porch. The sun was going down. The air was still. He said, "Do you resent them?" I thought about it carefully. Then I said, "I resent what they tried to do. I resent the years they ignored you. I resent that they came back only when they thought they could profit from your lives. But I do not want to become bitter." He nodded. "That is good," he said. "Bitterness is expensive." That sentence stayed with me. Bitterness is expensive. It costs your sleep, your peace, your ability to trust the next person who is actually honest. And I had already paid enough. I was not going to pay with my future too. So I made a choice. I stopped waiting for my siblings to become who I needed them to be. I stopped expecting apologies I knew were never coming. I stopped hoping they would suddenly discover decency when they had spent years proving they had none. Instead, I focused on the life still in front of me. I hired extra help from my parents so I would not burn out completely. I organized all the legal files. I made sure every account, every document, every instruction was stored safely. I set reminders for medicine and appointments. I built a routine that gave my parents dignity and gave me breathing room. And slowly, the house became a home again. Not because the family was fixed, because the truth had finally been admitted. And sometimes truth is the only foundation strong enough to build peace on. People often think the biggest battle in a story like this is in the courtroom or at the reading of the will. It is not. The biggest battle is in the moment you realize the people you loved most were willing to use your kindness as a weapon. That is the part that changes you forever. You do not look at every smile the same way again. You do not hear every apology the same way again. You do not trust a sudden visit the same way again. And maybe that is sad, but it is also wisdom, hard-earned wisdom, the kind that only comes after your heart has been forced to learn what your hope refused to accept. A few weeks later, my mother asked me something that surprised me. She said, "Did you always know they would do this?" I answered honestly, "No, but I knew they were capable of it." She nodded. "And that was enough?" I looked at her and said, "It had to be. Because love without awareness becomes vulnerability, and protection without action becomes regret." I was not going to regret this family. I had already spent enough years watching everyone else step away. I was not going to let them step in at the end and rewrite history for profit. The final thing I remember is the day the official disinheritance papers were completed. That may sound cold to some people, but it was not revenge. It was consequence. A consequence for manipulation. A consequence for attempted coercion. A consequence for pretending to care only when there was something to gain. My siblings were formally removed from any claim they might have imagined, not because I wanted to punish them, because they had already punished themselves by revealing who they really were. And when the law, the evidence, and the truth all stand in the same room, lies do not get to keep their inheritance. If there is one thing I want people to take from my story, it is this. Do not confuse blood with loyalty. Do not confuse attention with love. And do not wait until greedy people are holding your parents' signatures in their hands before you decide to protect what matters. The people who stayed are the ones who matter. The people who cared when there was nothing to gain are the ones worth keeping. And the people who only returned when they smelled money were never really family to begin with. They were opportunists wearing family names. And in the end, the daughter they ignored was the one who made sure they could never steal what they came for. Because love is not always loud. Sometimes it sits quietly at a bedside for years. Sometimes it remembers every medicine and every appointment. Sometimes it notices the lies before anyone else does. And sometimes, when the moment finally comes, love walks into the room with proof and brings the whole lie down.